All right. So George, you have a presentation, which is wonderful because a lot of people just wing it, but you have put together some things that you're going to do screen sharing with us, and that will be fun. Do you want to go ahead and I think you have something planned for your presentation
Yeah,
before we...
yeah, I can go ahead and start.
All right.
So if along the way anyone is dying to ask a question, the first part of obviously is a chat, but I'm open to questions because I can just keep rattling on, and I would like to be of some use to you, some information. So I'm going to start from the beginning, which is a little bit about my background, and Carolyn will talk a little bit about hers. But when I was growing up, I grew up in England, and I worked for Decca Navigator. It's the same company that's Decca Records, but it's not. Decca had Decca TVs, and they had Decca radar, and they had Decca all sorts of things. And I worked in the Navigator section, and the Navigator section was actually contracted by the Royal Air Force. So I had to sign the National Secrets Act, and I worked in research and development in airborne navigation systems for many years for them before GPS. And I was also an apprentice, and I went to college, and I learned tube technology in college. And then it switched over to solid state, and it kind of ages me, right? That's my background. In fact, Carolyn and I were in England a few years ago, and I found one of my old books from college, and I was doodling, and I drew up a push-pull tube amplifier in my doodle. It wasn't part of the curriculum, but it was something I was drawn to. So through that process, not only did I learn about electronics, obviously, but also about mil specs and about vibrations and testing. And because one of the things we were doing was trying to figure out when a piece of equipment would fail and would pull it out of the aircraft before it failed because somebody's life depended on it. Mean time between failure, it was called. So anyway, basically how that translates to what we're doing today and to you guys is that when we ship something, it is designed to, for the most part, hold up in shipping. Now, it's interesting because we were looking up FedEx recommendations on what to expect. And in FedEx, they say that in the US, that they're going to drop a box likely about 15 times. Now, Carolyn and I have seen the monoblocks go, and this guy would throw the monoblock across the truck in the back of the van, and it has to survive all this stuff. So it's all about vibration and making it, solid, and it's designed that way. So all that, all my past, I'm trying to put to good use here. And for the most part, the shipping stuff works, but it's not, it's not 100%. Sometimes, who knows what they do. And by the way, internationally, it's 25 times they throw the thing across the truck. So I can't imagine. And then, so I was also a musician. I played guitar. Not very good, I was okay. So I wanted to do something that combined both the a musical part and an engineering part. So I got into audio engineering. And since then, I have worked many thousands of hours in the studio, many live performances with a whole variety of instruments.
Okay. Go ahead, George.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, somebody was asking how we do this. Once I have the electronic design, I've got a prototype. Carolyn and I go back and forth of where some things can go and can't. There's some knobs you can't put there, but you can put it over here. But always it has to look good to both of us. It's kind of like when you eat a meal, it has to look good. Looking good makes it taste better. It's the same kind of process. So that throughout everything that we do, we try to follow along with that. So continuing with this, any questions about our pasts by any chance? So should I continue?
David seems quiet there.
Yes, okay. All right, I'm moving on. You're muted. So phono stage. I'm going to talk about phono stages. Now, some of you know all about this and some of you don't. And so it's a good place for me to start because that's how we started the company. And this is how our design philosophy, we're going to go over how that was in, how we did this, how we used that design philosophy and put it into this equipment. So we started with a phono stage, partly because I think phono stages are hard to do. So I wanted to do it first. I figured if I could do a phono stage, it'll get things going or not, and do something else. So I had to take a step back and see, well, okay, what does a phono stage really do? Well, it does a number of things. The first thing it does is amplify a very small signal, approximately 400 times. I mean, it depends, on the phono stage, the gain, and so on. But just a sense of like this box, or if it's in part of your preamp or whatever, it is amplifying a very small signal a great deal. Yeah, so that's the first thing. The other thing that's going on is it has to follow an equalization curve to decode the record. Now I'm going to share my screen with you for a minute so you can see. Okay, you got it?
It looks good. You finally got a full screen. I do. Yeah.
Okay. So okay, so what happened was, I mean, I'm not sure, maybe somebody has a more accurate historical thing about what really happened with this, what the more accurate, but essentially from my point of view, just seeing what the results were, is that, okay, 78s, let's start there. That was some, like the predecessor, if you like, to long playing records. If you've ever heard one or you heard it on television or whatever, it's that thin and, not too much bass and very scratchy. So when they were doing, trying to do long playing records, LPs, they needed to somehow do a couple of things. First thing is they needed to make it quieter, reduce the surface noise. And the other problem they had is that bass takes up a lot of space in the groove of a record. It's pretty wide, and they couldn't get that much groove on a record without the stylus just literally jumping out of the groove. So I think, and I don't know this for sure, but this is my suspicion, somebody brilliant decided, well, what if we put it through a tone control, a couple of tone controls, and cut the record first? So what it looks like is somebody took a bass control and cut the bass. If you could see here, this dotted line go all the way down to 20 hertz. And then boost the treble. Let's turn the treble all the way up. And it went up to 20 hertz, boosting it up 20 dBs. And that's how a record is cut. If you were to listen just straight off what's on that album, this is what you'd hear. Pretty nasty. So what the phono stage does is does the opposite. It boosts the bass 20 dBs and cuts the highs by 20. So 20 hertz is boosted 20 dB. This is approximate. And the highs get cut by 20, the 20 kilohertz. So that when you play it back, hopefully you get a straight line through here. So that's one of the things. So, okay, so I was thinking, all right, the phono stage boosts the signal a lot, which is susceptible to noise. And you're boosting the bass by additional 20 dBs compared to everything else. So it's susceptible to hum. And that's a key thing. And this was part of the challenge in designing a tube phono stage and designing it for it to be quiet. Because tubes will pick up noise, like Carolyn was saying, you have to move away from the power supply. There's a lot of things that you can do. And so back to back to the phono stage, it had to work as well as it can, under the circumstances and keeping that noise down. And part of that was like, for instance, for moving core cartridges, that how do you get the most signal into the phono stage? Because in essence, it's a signal to noise ratio. So you're always looking at the greater the signal, the lower the noise will be, because it's a ratio between the two. So how do you get the most signal, most music, if you'd like, from that point of view, into a phono stage? And for me, the obvious choice was a step-up transformer. All our phono stages have a built-in step-up transformer, because the step-up transformer happens to be has the right properties to allow all have what I call a handshake between the cartridge and the transformer, to have the right properties to allow all the music to come in as much as you can. The other part of that, the advantage, was to be able to put loading on that cartridge on the secondary. And what loading does, it controls the dynamic range of that cartridge by restricting the movement of the cantilever. Let me show you a quick, I'm sure you guys may have seen this, but let me show you a slide of the needle, of course, is the stylus. And but it gives you a sense of what that's doing. It's trying to go through this this canyon and try and get as much information as possible. So if it's if the stylus, if the cantilever is allowed to move as fast as it wants, it's basically going to bounce right out of there or bounce across it. It's kind of like if you had a car and you had bad shocks, the tire kind of like bounces around. And if you had a car with very stiff shocks, in other words, with loading that was a high loading amount, which restricted the stylus too much, it would do the same thing. It wouldn't really track. So there's a sweet spot in there with loading that allows you to allows the stylus to track properly. And this is all assuming that mechanically it's set up properly. You've got the the downforce and the tracking and the VTA and all that. I'm not going to get into all that, but just basically by loading on the secondary, it still controls the cantilever and controls the cartridge and can fine tune it without putting just a resistor across the cartridge, which effectively shunts part of the signal. This does not. So it allows that music to come through. Now, just for your information, you probably know this, but just in case, the lower the number of the loading, like 100 ohms, it's a greater load than 1,000 ohms. It's the other way around. The lower the lower the number, the more you're asking from the cartridge, the more current you're trying to pull from it. It's kind of like if you had a power generator. If you put too much load on that generator, it'll bog down. You're not going to get 120 volts out of it. So if you've got loading too low, you're just not allowing the cartridge to have a signal come out properly. And then if you don't load it at all, of course, generators, some governors, it would have just spun out of control. Cartridges are like generators. They need to be they have a sweet spot, if you'd like, a range. And typically on a cartridge, it says no lower than, say, it says like 30 ohms. To me, that means what the cartridge manufacturer is suggesting, don't go below 30. Otherwise, it's okay. You can just adjust it. People always ask me, so what's the right setting for that? There is no right setting. I think it depends on the music, your system, how dynamic you like it. It doesn't change the frequency response. It just changes the dynamic range. What that means is the loud sections compared to the quiet sections. It makes them either not as far apart from each other or closer. So the other part of this is part what we did with the phono stages is that they're not hybrids. They're 100% tube, except for the power supplies. I have solid state power supplies. And actually, most of the switching you can do on the fly. So you can change the loading and be able to hear exactly what's going on. I think that's an important thing I never remember. If I have to keep turning it off, going back and changing and coming back, well, yeah. And in this section, one last thing about hum. Now, I think we've all experienced ground loops and hum. And let me go to this next slide. Essentially, again, this is sometimes it's an art form more than a science, but essentially, what's going on is that it's if you have multiple grounds, which is inevitable in some way or another, then you can get a situation where you got a little bit of current going through one of the grounds, and that creates hum. Now, on our phono stages, we have a ground lift switch. It's from my pro background. Pretty much, you'll notice that everything we have has a ground lift switch. It's just a way of breaking the ground, like in this section. You could just see where it says source and ground signal. If you were to cut this, it gets rid of that one loop, and it could reduce the noise quite a bit, depending on what the turntable you have. There's some turntables that even that doesn't work. I've ran into this, and maybe you guys have. It's just, no matter what I do, I can't get rid of it. And they have somehow decided that it was a good idea to ground the motor ground, the case ground of the tone arm and the turntable to the signal ground together. And the only way the only time I would recommend to get rid of the hum with that is your cheetah plug. Just use that on your turntable, and it will get, the chances are it'll get rid of the noise. If that is the case, you've got the motor noise going through, but sometimes that isn't enough, because you've got multiple grounds. So it's one of those things, but at least this gives you a sense of something you could do. Any questions?
Yeah, there were some questions, George. Fred Stanky wanted to know if you were talking about moving coil or moving magnet cartridges when you were describing the process of your phono stage.
Moving coil.
Because you have the step-up transformers.
Yes, because I talked about the steps. Yeah, I talked about the step-up transformers and the MC cartridges, moving coil. On MM, you can't really lift the ground, because it's a single-ended input. But with a moving coil, because you're using a step-up transformer, you could use it as a true differential input, even if it's an RCA connector, because you could still lift the ground and still get the signal. And most modern turntables have a differential output from the cartridge.
And Jim Bird wanted to know, when you were talking about keeping your designs as simple as possible, he said, are there any other circuit designs you are drawn to or stay away from?
Circuit designs I'm drawn to is the simplest form that I can get. And that, I'm working with power amplifiers, with phono stages, line amplifiers, whatever. If it's very complicated, it is likely not to work. From my perspective, from my point of view, it's not something I'm drawn to. So I keep away from complicated designs. And in fact, the challenge is not to complicate it myself, which is easy for me to do. Oh, gee, I could do this and I could do that, and it's keeping it back. What was the other part of that question, David?
Any designs that you stay away from, and I guess you answered that by saying anything complex. Although you do have 3 phono stages, right? The Andros 2, which is now succeeded by the Andros Deluxe 2. Is that correct?
No, we have. I'll go over it. We have the Andros 1.2, which is the new versions, the Andros 2. The Andros Deluxe, which is the Andros Deluxe 2 now, and the Andros Tessera. We actually have stopped making, and we've redesigned it, and we're going to relaunch it. I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
3 phono stages and a step up.
And yeah, and the step up uses transformers that are different from the transformers that are in your phono stages, or just uses them in a box that allows you more control?
It's in the box that allows you more control. It's the same one as the top of the line phono stages.
Great.
Anything else?
Oh, I think there was the question, what is your approach to transformer iron in amps? Transformers, iron and amps. So that's an amplifier question regarding the transformers that you use with your power amplifiers, I guess.
Oh yeah, they're proprietary transformers.
So you have all your own transformers made, the step-up transformers and the
Some
amplifiers?
some are made, some are off the shelf. We use Jensen transformers for our signal transformers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Give you a sense of it. And we have, you know, toroids that are custom built for power supplies. And anything else? Go on. There. So the next thing, let me just get the next slide up here. Let me share the screen one more time. Okay, so this is our Andros 2. The previous version was the 1.2, and the difference is it has a different power supply. But real briefly, it has, and I'll show you the back and everything, but it has a 10-position MC loading. It has an MC, well, actually, let me go there. It's much easier to show you than to, there we go. 10-position MC loading on the back. It has one MC input, either balanced or RCA, and you can't put people often ask, can I put 2 MC cartridges in here? No, one or the other. They're actually just tied together, so you can't use 2 MC cartridges. An MM input, there's a switch that switches between them, a gain switch for the MC, and here's your ground switch, the ground lift switch. And there's 2 of them, one for each section. And this is effectively a dual mono. Well, all of them are effectively dual mono. And this is a single-ended out. To give you a sense of the unit. Let's see, what did I miss? Oh yeah. So the other thing, and this is part of this new design of the new Andros 2, is that we have a new power supply, but I'll go back to that in a second. But this phono stage has a maximum output of 8.5 volts, because I realized that, especially on ours phono stages, we don't have a volume control. So when you have signal going through this, the volume is always max. So you have to have enough headroom to allow all that music to come through. You know, I mean, and not, again, back to my point of view is that I don't want to hear the equipment when I'm listening to it. I want to just sit back and get a glass of wine and enjoy the music. And if I hear, you know, that it's not as dynamic as it could be because something is holding it back, I do something about it. So having a very high output available from a phono stage, I think is important to do that. And let's see. And then I use 4 12AX7s. And the 2 in the back are the inputs. This is the ones on the left are the left channel, ones on the right are the right channel, and the 2 in the back are essentially the inputs, and the 2 in the front are essentially the outputs. So a question that gets asked, might be a good point to point out, that a question that gets asked is, over a period of time, my left and right balance changes. Then what do I do? And I just switch the tubes from left to right. Of course, don't switch both tubes from left to right, because you're going to get the imbalance in the opposite direction. But do, you know, one set at a time, and you should be good. Now, the other thing I want to mention is go back to, I mentioned something about our new power supply, our new ESP supply. What happened was, this is what happened. This is the benefit of COVID. Let me get out of this. The benefit of COVID was that idle hands and all that. I had time to think about designs and realized I hadn't really looked at the power supplies for a while, for a long time. So I went back and tried and redesigned them. The original power supplies for these units, which work perfectly well, were linear regulated supplies. They're very good. They hold a very steady voltage. They're very good. They're good sounding supplies. But I would just wonder what would happen if instead of making a complex supply, okay, there's a theme here, to a more something with less components and a beefier power supply, what it would sound like. And it is surprisingly how much better it sounds. So I went from regular IE transformers, the regular transformers bobbins, to toroids, and made a much simpler supply, but made it very beefy. And so we can, that's the main difference to Andros 1.2 and the 2, is we switched out the power supplies. And I tell you, everyone that's heard this says is surprised also by what a difference it makes. It's allowed to breathe. It's allowed to perform to its potential, and it is available as an upgrade to any of the Andros 1.2s. Not to the ones, to the original ones, the Andros PS1s, which are original ones. They're a little too old. Because some of it is because the power supply went from 250 to 300 volts. And some of those caps, it's 10-year-old caps, capacitors, it could be. It could work, so, but no guarantee.
What I'd like to just, one thing is on our website, we have an Excel spreadsheet that does the comparison between all the specs between the Andros 1.2 and the Andros 2. And also on all the phono stages on the website, there's a comparison between all the phono stages. So if you want to just see what the difference is with the specs, it's all right available, as well as a tab for cartridges. So we asked a lot of dealers and customers a while ago what kind of loading they used on what cartridges. And so we put that on our website as well.
And your website, I have to give you kudos, is so well designed and so easy to navigate and so easy to find all of the things that you just talked about. I mean, some websites from some manufacturers, you have to dig around and you click on a link to go somewhere and it takes you to yours. I checked it out last night and this morning, and I indeed saw the PDF of the comparison between the old phono and the new one, and it tells you you've increased the power output while decreasing the power consumption, all of those things, and it was a breeze to navigate. So check it out if you haven't been there.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Any questions before I move on?
Well, someone asked why no separate power supply, and I replied that it is available on the Tessera, right? The Tessera.
No, the Tessera, I haven't got to the Tessera yet.
Okay.
What? No, it's a separate.
It's a separate power
dual
supply.
chassis. He's asking about a dual chassis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, you're asking whether.
Why not an outboard power supply on your phono stage?
Well, we can certainly. We can design. We could certainly design a outboard, a separate outboard power supply. See, so what's the benefit of a second power supply? Why do people want it?
I think they just meant in a different chassis from the rest of the phono stage.
Yeah, I understand the question.
Isolate the noise.
Well, how much? You see, here's the question. Sure, you cost another, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000. And if you hear these, you'll notice that they're pretty quiet. In fact, they're noted for being quiet. So it's kind of like our top of the line phono stage has a separate power supply. But I think that there's a tendency to think that it would be better, and it would be better if you had an outboard, a second box for a power supply. But the degree of improvement versus versus the cost. And to me, it just didn't make any sense. And back to the complexity thing, it makes it that much more complicated because you have an umbilical cord. Now you've got 2 more sets of connectors. You have to have a way of turning it on and off and putting it on standby and so on. So it goes in the wrong direction for me from being something that is simple. I'd rather design it and make it quiet in the single box if it's possible. Now, on our top of the line unit Tessera, that is the case. We had to put it in a separate box. It's a much bigger power supply. It was almost impossible. Carolyn and I were just talking about it. Almost impossible to fit it in the box, but it does create more noise than these do. So it has to be out in a second box.
All right.
Anything else, David? Shall I continue?
I think that's good. Yeah. No other questions on this section.
Okay. All right. So the next phono stage I want to go over is the Andros Deluxe II. Let me share my screen one more time.
I do want to say while that's coming up that there is a brand new review that just came out within the last 24 hours on positive feedback online on the Deluxe. And it's mainly the comparison between the Deluxe 1 and the Deluxe 2 and what a difference the power supply makes. So that's just posted yesterday on positive feedback. Okay, go ahead, George.
And actually, we were there, and when we switched up, you'll see, both Carolyn and I were there. We were at Bob Levy's house, and I took the other old power supply out and put the new one in. And we were listening. We had exactly the same volume, exactly the same cables, exactly the same tube. Everything was exactly the same. And it was like it doesn't take very long. It's really obvious that all of a sudden you've got wow, it sounds better. You know, it has it's more dynamic. It's better stereo imaging and so on. So, all right, the Deluxe 2. This is the next. I mean, we have good, better, best. The Andros 2 is a good phono stage, and the original one has great reviews. Has, you know, I mean, it's been around for a while, and it's really a good phono stage. Then this is a better one. It's called the Deluxe 2. It looks similar. It has slightly different logos on the front, but on this one I use different tubes. I use two 12AX7s and two 12DW7s. Anyone have any? Do you want me to explain 12DW7s? Anybody want to know? Yeah. All right. So the 12, I figured what happens in the 12 series tubes. They have, actually, let me just turn this off because it's pretty static. What happens is in the 12 series tubes, in the glass envelope, there's actually 2 active components. There's 2 triodes. There's actually, in a 12AX7, there are 2 sections, if you'd like, 2 amplifiers. In the 12AU7, for instance, there's 2 12AU7s in there. So when you use these, you effectively have, each tube has 2 amplifiers. Now, again, keeping in the spirit of keeping things as simple as possible, the 12DW7 has an AX7 and a 12AU7 half, one of each. So instead of adding 2 more tubes and having a second 12AX7 or second 12AU7, making it 6 tubes, I wanted to keep it at 4 tubes and cut all those circuits out. Again, keeping it simple, allowing that music to flow through the best it can without going through the least number of parts. So these tubes, and it's they have both a 12AX7 and a 12AU7. And yes, and you can get NOS tubes with that. Any questions on the 12DW7s? Okie dokie, here we go. Screen share this. Also, the other thing about this phono stage is the step-up transformers in here are much bigger. And how that affects the sound, it's more than just bigger. They're just they have a higher resolution. They have better phase coherency from left to right. And what that means is that stereo imaging, it's much tighter. It has a more precise stereo image. If you had a vocal, for instance, and it's like, I don't know, 2 foot wide in your stereo image, these step-up transformers, which are used on the MC input, make it more like 6 inches. So you get a more precise sound, a more precise stereo image from left to right, and a better depth. They're more precise, the high quality transformer. And it's the same ones we use on the top end unit, Tessera, and on the Alaso step-up transformer. So it has better step-up transformers built in. It has the 212AX7s, 212DW7s, and then the controls, the business end, the control, everything's on the back again. There's ground lift switches again, and then there's a balanced input and a single-ended for MC with a 10-position loading. And then the switch, the MC-MM switch, and the MM inputs. Now, the MM sounds really good, by the way. I haven't really been talking a lot about that. But the MM has to sound good, I think, in order for the MC to sound good. The MC has no chance of sounding good if the MM doesn't sound good. I think both things go hand in hand. And the gain switch in this unit works for both MM and MC. It works for both. And what those are, you can go to our website and do, you can see what all the gain settings are and so on, all the technical details. And this one has balanced out and single-ended out. So it's a little quieter. It actually is more dynamic. And let's see, what was the other thing on this one? I think it's like 9. Oh yeah, it has 9 volts out. So it has a little more headroom than the Andros 2. And this is also upgradable. If you have a Deluxe and you want it upgraded to a Deluxe 2, we could certainly do that. Anything else? David, move on.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, nothing about this. John Bratton was asking about some KT88 tubes that will be coming from Charlie Whitner and Western Electric yesterday in the ATL Audio Club, and he wants to know, BIA, anyone?
No, David, I'm sorry. I didn't say that very well, and maybe we wait until George and Carolyn are into the amp section. Okay. But my question really had to do with their thoughts on plugging their amplifiers directly into the wall versus power conditioners a la a Niagara from Audio Quest or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to go over that too, John.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's the difference with these power amplifiers. They're a little different. So yeah, all right, let me finish preamps. We'll get to the power amps. All right, so this is the, all right, let's go on to the next one. Gives you, this is our Tessera, our top of the line. Now, this one, we actually stopped making in a sense, and we upgraded it. It's now the reference. And we'll be out, what do you think, Carolyn, the end of the month?
A month, yeah.
6 months?
6 weeks or a month, yeah.
So, okay, it's just about, the R&D project on this was completed a little while ago. The parts are ordered, but because we can't get all the metalwork is what's holding us up. And our metal fabricator also does work for SpaceX. So guess who gets bumped if, but they're really good. I mean, they're very precision made. I don't want to go somewhere else unless I have to, because they're so good. They're accurate, and that's important. So we're kind of waiting on the metalwork more than anything. We have these. I've had this running for a while. I've been listening to it. We've got everything's made on it except we don't have the enclosures, the metalwork, and that's on its way. All right. So on this unit, it's a little different. a little more complicated, but hey, I had to do one that was a little more complicated. All the controls on the front, obviously, and all the switching is done on the back. It's done with relays. There's like 70 relays in the back, and so it has. Let me go to the next slide. It'll be easier to describe. So essentially, it has two channels. Each channel is a stereo channel. Okay, so it has a left and right for each of the channels, but you can get 4 cartridges in here, 2 MC and 2 MM, and switch between them. It has each channel has an MC MM switch with 2 different MM settings, and it has 3 gain positions and 12 position loading. So you could actually tune this pretty well to whatever you need. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, I'll have 1 MC cartridge on one input and an MM on the other, or a mono cartridge, and switch between them, A and B. And when you switch, you don't get any clicks and pops or anything. You could always switch the loading, and everything's on the front. It's easy to see what's going on. Now, let's see. This one, the new reference, is going to use 2 12AX7s, 2 12DW7s, and 2 12AU7s. So it's 6 tubes. And it does have a separate power supply. It's a separate box. I don't have a photo of it, but it's pretty hefty. It's like, what, like 17 inches by, I don't know, 6 inches by 6 inches. All those power supplies got upgraded. They're all toroid power supplies. They're all really, it's a hefty little thing. And there's a 3-meter umbilical cord, and we really recommend you use it. Put it as far away from everything as you can. It is quieter. So the Andros 2 is quiet. It's really quiet. The Deluxe is quieter, and this one I can barely measure the noise level. It is that quiet. The black level is incredibly quiet. And yeah, so that should be coming out in a little bit. What's this? Oh yeah, the back. Here's the business end. 2 channels, each one with MMMC, ground lift switches, and balanced outs, and single-ended. And this is the connector for the umbilical. And as Carolyn was saying earlier, here's a snapshot of that. You don't have to try and read this. Here's a snapshot of that PDF. You can download it if you want, but it gives you the differences. Now, the Tessera, I haven't updated what the new reference parameters are going to be, what's actually going to produce, but it's there is an improvement, but I haven't updated this particular piece of paperwork yet, but which is up on our website. And there's also another thing on our website that compares the 3 phono stages. Anything else? Any questions of this?
Well, somebody asked about what was the old price of the Tessera? I know the reference is price to be determined. What was the price on the old Tessera?
What was it, Carolyn?
12,000.
12,000.
The old one's 12. The new one's going to be about 18.
All right.
And
but it's got 2 boxes.
Yes.
Well, the old one did too, but
yeah,
it's substantially, everything's been redesigned within it, except for the boxes. So it's definitely beefier, better. Yeah.
Actually, the challenge was the Deluxe sounds so good to make this sound better.
Yeah.
That really is that was really the problem. The Deluxe sounded better than the Tessera, the original one. When I put those power supplies in, all of a sudden it's like, oh, gonna do something about this, and you know, and that was the challenge, make it sound better. And as we've been comparing, and so yeah, it's taken what, a year, Carolyn, something like that.
Yeah, George has designed a goosebump feature in there. I call it the goosebump feature. So when I listen to stuff like big classical, I literally get goosebumps on it, on this. So that's a joke, but you know, it sounds good.
So you're not going to be at the show. Do you have a show that you're targeting for your return to exhibiting that we might see the reference at?
Mhm. Yes, it's the Expo show in Chicago.
Okay, so you're going to be at this year's Expo.
Yeah,
Yep, in October.
yeah.
That's the only show we have lined up. We were going to do Munich, and that obviously is not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's our next show. And let's see. Right now, we're scheduled to work with Tannoy speakers, which should be interesting.
Legacy brand, yeah.
Have
Yeah.
you used them before?
Our dealer here, Upscale, has them, and they have all our equipment. I was over there and we played around with them for an afternoon, and yeah, actually they sound pretty good.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good. I think it's going to be interesting. A different sound. I just, we always try to, as much as possible, get different speakers, different things in there to, so people can see how it matches with different equipment. We've used all sorts of speakers.
What kind of speakers do you use in your home with your equipment?
Martin, Django
Okay.
L.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we use. But we've used Karma,
CAD,
Ver-
TAD,
Verity.
yeah.
Uh,
We try to use as many as we can.
Yeah,
Many
it's
different
fun,
ones.
fun to
that
change
we-
it up.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
really do.
Jeff
Hey,
Joseph.
George, we're gonna need to do a break soon, so.
Oh, okay.
Alasso, we just
Let me-
cover that
let me-
real quick.
Let me do the lasso real quick.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the step up. Let me share the screen.
And the break is for you, solely for you. So
Oh,
Okay.
really?
don't
Cool.
feel like you need to rush through the Alasso.
All right. All right. Here's the screen. So this has the same step up transformers as the Deluxe and the Tessera. On those transformers have, I'm only using part of the windings. I'm using a 1:8 ratio and only part of the winding combination because it's a built-in device. When the transformer is integrated, I can adjust the electronics to the transformer and vice versa. In this case, this will work with any standard MM input on any phono stage. So you could use these high quality transformers and have the versatility with any MM input. And now the way this is set up, I've got 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, 1 to 12. So it goes from 12, 16, 18 to 22 dBs of gain. And there's a 10 position loading. And the reason there isn't numbers here, because it's done on a secondary, it's a multiplier of the ratio. And there's also a mono stereo switch. And what I did is took the left input only and sent it out to both outputs. I didn't do left plus right. I just did left. Some of the older mono cartridges have only got only has one output rather. So that's made sense to me to just take the one. And then the rear, again, groundless, and the MC inputs, and then basically you're converting an MC cartridge into an MM cartridge with this. So if you used it with this with our Deluxe phono stage, for instance, you could use 2 MC cartridges. I actually had somebody that needed a 3rd MC cartridge on a Tessera, and this is the way to go, and also this gives you a little more versatility. You have so many more adjustments, and pretty much will work with most cartridges, 95% of all cartridges. There's some cartridges that are extreme that this is not going to work with. And this is a little sheet we have both on our website, and we hand out. It slides right under the step ups, a handy little. So you could see for the different ratios, like typically, depending on the cartridge. I start with a 18 dBs of gain and 400 ohm load and adjust it. And people will always ask, well, what's the correct setting? And it actually really is dependent on the kind of music you like, how dynamic you like it, your system. There's so many variables. And the idea is turn the knobs. Don't be afraid to turn the knobs and actually hear what's going on, because you'll have a setting, you'll find a setting that works for you, and that's the idea. Gives you flexibility. Any questions on the step up, Alasso? Okay.
So do you want to take a bathroom break now? And
Well,
then,
let me just.
or do you want to just,
Do you want me to go on just a little bit and tie this up and then take a break?
Okay.
Just real briefly. Now, it's important for this unit to be grounded to the phono stage, because otherwise you'll get a bunch of noise. But a couple of quick things. I've had people calling and having problems with noises in the phono stages. And they're like, there's this thumping sound that's really rhythmic. What's going on? And it ends up being they had it right next to a TV box, satellite box. And it'll pick up noise. And another guy had one, had an access point that was nearby. It was generating noise. Now, these things are shielded really well. One of our dealers in New York, right, Carolyn, was it the Empire State Building?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was within line of sight. And these are the only phono stages that didn't get radio frequency interference in them, because they're really well grounded and really well shielded. But if you got, a hub, a network hub, or access point, a Wi-Fi thing right next to it, you will get noise. And one of the other culprits is power supplies for turntables. They can generate a lot of noise. And that's another thing to keep away from. And if you have a noise from a phono stage, I usually recommend turn the thing if 45 degrees, or move it if you can, and see if the noise goes away. A lot of times it's noise that's generated nearby. In other words, don't place it near, anything that has electromagnetic, generates magnetic noise, or has, RF noise or whatever. It's just asking for it, because you're boosting the signal so much, it's going to happen. I just want to continue with the preamps, and then we'll go to the power amps. The last section of the preamps is our lineup, our Lido Ultra 2 preamp. And let me share the screen real quick so you see what I'm talking about. It's the same general shape that Carolyn had, except now this thing has these big round knobs on the front. You could tell instantly that it's not the same as the other units. And this, as a line amp, has actually, there's a history to it. We had the Lido, then the Lido 1.5, and this is the Lido Ultra. The first two versions of the Lido were different circuits than this. This is a completely different circuit, and it uses two 12AU7s and two 12DW7s, back to those combination. And then also, because it's a line amp, it doesn't have to amplify as much. So there's a lot of things you can do. Let me just show you the close-up of the controls in the front, and then I'll go over what's going on here. On the right side, there are three gain positions, 3, 6, and 9. And by the way, everything that you can adjust manually, you can use a remote control for. Every single thing. So the gain is changeable, the input selections adjustable, everything. You could do it either manually or with a remote, which is quite handy. So the three gain positions, 3, 6, and 9 dBs. And there's 6 inputs. Now, the first 3, 1, 2, and 3 are single-ended, and the next 3, 4, 5, and 6 are balanced. The true transformer balanced inputs. And there's a microprocessor in here which remembers the gain position and based on the input. So for instance, you have a high output DAC on input 1, and you may want to have that gain set at 3 dBs. And then a phono stage, which has a low output in input 2, and you may want to have that at 9 dBs of gain because it's quieter. Now, when you switch between inputs 1 and 2, it will remember what gain setting you had for each of those, and it will switch it. And this saves going over there and changing the volume control. I mean, you still have to, but it's not as much, you don't have to, or blast yourself out of the room because you forgot to change it, which is I've done. And this, it's very handy. So the thing about line amps for me is, from my point of view, is I want something that allows all the music to come through, and it has good functions. It allows me to do what I want to do with it, because a preamp, a line amp, is like the heart of your system, whether it's analog or digital, whether it's streaming, whether it's whatever it is, any form of, whatever the source is, if it's a, whatever, Pandora, you still have to be able to control it. And that's why some of the reasoning for the selection of this stuff. So having a microprocessor allows it to be able to be switched. So as it features, this is really good, but it also has to sound good. And that's why the circuits are completely new in this, using the 12DW7. I kind of like those things. They actually save space, reduce parts, and sound better. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it follows along with the whole theme of what we're trying to do. So it's the right direction. And then there's a mute over here. There's a mute LED that's not lit right now. When you first turn the unit on, that LED goes on again for safety. So then you have to unmute it. Now, to unmute it, you could push that button, the input button, and you push it in, it turns the mute on and off, or you could do it with a remote. And then, of course, a standard motorized volume control. It's a Alps standard motorized control. That's pretty straightforward. But then, I don't know about you guys, but I've had some issues over the years where the better the quality the system, or not better quality, the more refined, the more resolving it is, the more detail that I get from the system, the worse some albums sound, some sources sound. I have great performances that are barely listenable, and this is across all genres of music. There's classical, there's rock and roll, there's jazz, there's you name it. And it's partly, back to my background, I understand somewhere along the way, the mastering didn't go that well. And I have no idea what they were thinking or how it ended up that way, but it's like barely listenable. And it's frustrating getting a good performance with a good quality recording. And it got narrower and narrower and narrower to find these. So what I decided to do is to put, it's a type of tone control, but it isn't. It isn't. It is, but it's not a tone control like a bass boost and cut or a treble boost and cut. It wasn't appropriate for what we do. What this is technically a low pass filter. Okay, so at zero, when you have it on zero, it doesn't do anything. It's out of the circuit. Several people have said, I don't need this. All I want is just to hear it exactly as it is on that record. And I get it, I understand. That's where I always start. But depending on the song, you can actually start reducing the high frequencies a little bit at a time. Now, a shelving doesn't mean it cuts everything out above a certain frequency. What it does in this case, it just reduces them and allows the rest to come through. So you don't lose your cymbals, you don't get your stereo imaging collapse. You don't. I mean, it's a milder form of being able to reduce those highs. And as you go from -1 to -2 and so on, it's the same amount of reduction, but at a lower frequency. And the other benefit of this, there's some songs that just don't have enough bass. Somehow they just didn't put enough bass into the mastering. I could actually put it to -3 or -4 and turn the volume up, and now I have rebalanced it and created raise the volume of the bass compared to the mids and the highs. And yeah, so that's essentially what the presence control does. And it is actually very useful. If it's like people go, oh, I don't know if I need this, but when you have it and you put something on and you go, whoa, I could barely stand this. Let me just, you could actually do something about it and be able to hear some recordings that have incredible performances that are, less than perfect in mastering. Any questions?
Hey, George, it's John Bratton. Just a quick question regarding the trade-off between the gain and the volume control. I've read some things that say that many line preamps work better with a volume control, higher than 11 or 12 o'clock on the dial. Could you comment on whether it makes any difference at all to use a lower gain setting with a higher volume control or vice versa, and if that matters?
Okay, good question, John. Okay, I usually try to use this unit around 12 o'clock. And the problem is, it's not a sonic difference, but a control difference. There is they're logarithmic volume controls. And what happens is, let me get the slide up for a minute. What happens is that in the lower range of the volume control, you change it a little bit and it makes a big difference in volume. And as you go up in volume, it makes less and less difference. So you have more control at a higher volume. See, so there's a trade-off, because once you get past about 2 o'clock, you don't have as much control anymore, because now it's too fine a control, if you like. So I like to run around 12 o'clock because that's a good trade-off for me. But
okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
No, just thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. It's a common question. It's getting the right gain and different things to make that work. And in this particular case, because there's 3 gain settings, you could take advantage of that and get it set to a gain setting that allows you to do that. I always look at that. I look at the gain and look at the volume and kind of get them going in the right direction.
Yeah, I think John's question comes from the idea that a volume control is really an attenuation control. So you are reducing the output. The volume is set by your dB levels that you've got there, and then the volume control just adjusts within that. So theoretically, as you have it turned towards the top, you've taken the volume control out of the attenuation equation. Is that a fair assessment?
No.
Okay.
No, it doesn't work like that. A passive control does. If all it is a volume control and no electronics, then when that volume control is turned all the way up, it's as loud as it goes, because it's as loud, as much signal as it's putting in. The problem with that is it sounds good if you have the right combination of equipment. The problem is that it's not really driving an amplifier. And what I mean by that is you need to be able to tell the amplifier what you want it to do, and not the amplifier controlling what was previously. It's like the tail wagging the dog. It happens with amplifiers and speakers, by the way, which I'll get to. But it's like, what you want is this preamp, this line amp, has the output on this is 150 ohms. The output on this, you could drive a 200-foot cable. So if you have, like I have monoblocks set up, I can run on cables. It drives them. You can't do that with a passive control. And the volume control is in the middle of all these circuits. So it doesn't do what you think it does in terms of it's only an attenuator. Well, it is an attenuator, yes, technically, but it's the signal's amplified before it goes in there. In other words, in the circuits that I have, and I think most people might agree that's what, anyway, this is what I do. I have a buffer in the front. One of the tubes is a buffer. So when you put a signal in, it is not allowing the source to affect the sonic quality of the line out. It kind of stops it from going backwards. In other words, you know, I don't want to put a load on the previous stage and affect it. I want it to be independent. In other words, whatever the DAC or the phono stage or whatever it is that's going in there, it goes into a buffer so that that then becomes the signal and it's amplified enough, then it goes to the volume control and so on. It's not, it does attenuate, but the signal that the volume control gets is not the input. It's amplified before it gets to the volume control so that it isolates the input from the rest of the circuit. I found out earlier on in all these designs that unless you, it was with the phono stage actually. It's like, unless there's a way to control the way that the signal is fed to the next circuit, it will control you. In other words, the load, the output, if you plug in a phono stage into an input, and that input should not affect the sound of the phono stage and so on. They need to interact. They need to allow the signal to go through and to connect and to have what I call a handshake. But at the same time, you don't want it to affect it in a negative way. So the long answer is yes and no, John. But the advantage of this is that it really is almost irrelevant in this particular, you know, in the way that it goes into your system, because no matter what you throw at this thing, it will buffer it, adjust the volume. Again, it's a matter of controlling it and allowing that music to come through without interference. So any other questions that came up, David, or should I keep going?
I think that's good to go.
Okay. So let's see. Do I have another? I think I have another. Yeah, let me show you the back end of this. It's always good to see what's in behind all this, what you hook up to. By the way, all these are Nutrix connectors, and they're isolated, case isolated. So let me get my tool. Where are you? There we go. All right. So let's see. 3 single-ended inputs, 3 sets. 3 sets of balanced, true transformer differential balanced inputs. They're not full balanced like some other companies. This is a true balanced input. And then 4 outputs, 2 sets of balanced, 2 sets of single-ended. That way, you know, you can go to your main amplifiers, you can go to a headphone amp. If you wanted to, you can go to a sub or something else. You have a choice of outputs. And there are ground lifts on this, on the outputs. And over here, I just want to show this is the manual gain control. We didn't have room on the front of the unit to put a gain control, a push button control. So we put it on the back, and it's intentionally a clunky control so they can't accidentally hit it. In other words, a cable can't hit it or something else and get an unwanted change in volume when you don't want it to happen. Any question? Shall I move on?
Well, actually, Larry Brown had a question. He said,
Yeah.
why didn't you keep the balance control of the earlier unit when you added the presence control and circuitry of the new version of the Leto?
Okay, a good question. I personally think, from a designer's point of view, that a balance control is redundant. In the old days, you'd have to do it in order to compensate for, you know, an easy way to compensate from left and right in your system. But usually, for most people that I've talked to, 90% of the people, it's a matter of adjusting your system, your speakers in the right place, your everything else, so that you get a good stereo image and you have a good center when you go to mono. So the balance control was not, it's good for certain things. I think that if you have records or sources that have an imbalance, you can go and change it every time. but for the most part, it is not. And I actually think it degrades the signal a little bit. Going through there, it's not making it sound better. And keeping it simple, back to keeping it simple, it makes more sense to remove it. Whereas the presence control is a universal control that could be used at any time. There's no other way to adjust it, that kind of a tone control, other than with that. Where with the balance, it's a matter of you just can move things around and change that. Anything else, David?
No?
I'd like to say one thing before we move on, about the presence control. So we have two record bookcases, storage areas, and we sort of have our A section and our B section. And B section's all the ones we like listened to once or twice and didn't really like it, you know. Now that we have the presence control, I do not have enough room in the A section anymore, because there's all these albums that we just kind of like, I don't know, it doesn't sound right. And now we're really enjoying them. I was pleasantly surprised by that.
And Carolyn, are they older records? Are they certain kinds of records, or what? Because quite frankly, listen, I love you guys. I got your stuff. I wouldn't be without it, but I think the presence control sucks.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, here's a classic. What's the one with the classical record with the castanets, Carolyn? What's it called?
Espanola.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
So it's like, let's take one step further back. Okay, a lot of the records, especially the older records, John, some of the record companies decided to use their own curve and not the standard RIAA. And so just there, all of a sudden you got music that is coming at you from who knows, what kind of source it's coming from. It just sounds awful. And there's older records, there's newer records. I mean, every sort of genre. I mean, classical, a lot of classical that it's thin and nasty. And then there's like, there's rock and roll that's like, all of a sudden there's no bass to it. What in the world? You could hear the instrument, but there's no low end to it because they decided to do it that way. Jazz, there's some great jazz and some old, I mean, it's throughout. You never can tell which one is going to do it.
I think we all would find it kind of fun to look at your website at some point and see 3 albums that you might list, and you say presence control 5 for this, or presence control 3 for this, so that we can go and hear those and go, oh yeah, this sucks. I wonder what it would sound like with the presence.
Sure.
You don't always have to use the presence. That's
right.
The thing about it.
Yeah.
It's like you don't, a lot of albums we never use it.
Yeah.
And then some albums, like if you get a greatest hits, those are the worst because every song's mastered, engineered by somebody else. So a greatest hits, you might be using it on every other song. You may not use it at all. So it's, I don't know.
What I often use it for is the Doors, Riders on the Storm. Because the bass line is the song. That's what carries. It's the backbone of the song, and they didn't bring it up in remastering, or they didn't have it enough. So I turn the presence control to like a -4 and turn the volume up, which brings the bass up. And all of a sudden, it's all balanced. You still hear all the highs and the rain and everything else, but so that's might be something you're familiar with.
Yeah.
It's like you never know which one it's going to be. You put it on, you're going, huh? Wait a minute. Sure.
Okay.
Anything else? Presence? Anything else? All right. Move on to power amps. Okay. So let's see. Decided to design power amps a while ago, and how old's the buyer, Carolyn, our first one? 8 years ago, 7?
2013. 13, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Now, a couple of things that I kept in mind when designing these. I wanted to do it around KT88s at the time because of the geopolitical situation. I didn't know what was going to happen, whether Tungsol, you're going to still be able to find Tungsol tubes, or anybody else was making KD other tubes. So at the time, I used KD88s, and they're very good sounding tubes. And by the way, all our tubes are JJ, in case you're wondering. And the reason is they're not NOS, so they're very consistent. As a manufacturer, we need to have tubes, the current models that we can just buy, and they're not super expensive for people. I think you know, the 12DWs and AU7s and AX7s are like $25, and these KD88s on the stereo amp, or all our amps actually, like $40 a piece. So it's not going to kill you to retube when you need to, because tubes wear out. I mean, they just do. They're going to. So okay, let me show you a quick picture of the of a stereo amp, the Bayer 120. It's 60 watts a channel, class A. And what that means is when the unit is on, there's current going through these tubes. And it's when the music comes through, it allows that music to go through without trying to also affect the tubes. Now, what that means is, the comparison is, for those of us that know manual shift vehicles, if you're sitting at the light and you have the vehicle in, you're stopped, you're in neutral, the clutch is not pressed in, you're just idling there, the light turns green, you push the clutch in, put it in gear, slowly lift the clutch, push the gas down, and you drive off. Works very well. That's an AB. Most of the time you're sitting there, it's an idle, and then when you go to when you want to move forward, you gradually get up to speed. A class A, and this applies to both solid state and tube. It's regardless of what either one is. It's the same issue. A class A, you're in this vehicle. You have the clutch pushed in. You have it in gear. You're revving it to 4,000 RPM, and when it goes green, you drop the clutch, and you're gone. Instantaneous forward. And that's what the kind of difference sonically between A, B, and A. The downside of A is it uses more power. The good thing about AB, it uses less power. It's more efficient. But they both get very hot. Solid state and tube amplifiers that are class A get hot because by their nature, the active components are being turned on in order to get them on enough so the music comes through. The music doesn't have to turn them on, if that kind of makes any sense. But KT88, so this is an ultra linear push-pull class A. Okay, so each pair is one channel, a stereo left and a stereo right. Let's see. Now, let me share the screen again. I can point at things. And let's see. This is the back end of the amp, or the stereo. Now, the other advantage of a vacuum tube power amp is you have multiple taps on the output. And I strongly recommend trying different taps for your speakers. Somebody on Facebook posted today the frequency, the loading, the impedance of, I can't remember which speaker manufacturer, well-known speaker manufacturer, and it was just all over the place. And that's typical. You know, they say it's 8 ohms, well, at 1 kilohertz. But of course, we have music, which is a wide range. And you probably experienced this. On a solid state, you just have an output. On vacuum tubes like this, you can go 4 ohms or 8 ohms or 16. I don't use 16 very often, but between 4 and 8 ohms. 4 tends to have a little more body to the music, a little more bass, and 8 tends to be a little more airy, a little not brighter, but more open sounding. And below that is the fuses. And these fuses are just speaker fuses and not the mains fuse. The inputs I have a balanced and a single-ended input with a ground lift. And yeah, the IEC. So it's your basic stereo amp back here. Any questions? Keep moving.
Yeah, Jim Bird wanted to know, other than power tube availability, is there any other reason you picked the KT88 rather than something like the EL34? Or
the KT88 is, I like the sound of it, and these JJs are 42 watts per tube. Like for instance, let me talk a little bit about. Maybe it's a good time to talk about tube rolling. Maybe not. Just a second. Tube roll. Oh, let me come back to that. Let me come back to that question, if I might. Okay, one more thing I want to say while we're looking at this back. A common problem that I've seen people solve, I think in a dangerous way, is that there's a ground loop, and you get a hum from the amp. The amp creates, hooking everything up. You get a big hum. So what you do is they use a cheetah plug. Use a cheetah plug on the mains connector and plug it into the wall. And what that does is lifts the ground right here to the amp and floats the ground, right? I'm sure you've seen it. Maybe you've done it. Well, it's extremely dangerous with tube amplifiers. These power supplies, there's a power supply in here that's 500 volts at half an amp. And it's just, actually, there's 2 of them. Like that. It's really dangerous. If something happens, there's a component failure for some kind, and the case gets hot, electrically hot. If you touch it, it's really bad. So even though I really think they're appropriate for turntables, don't use them for any other electronic equipment, amplifiers, because it is dangerous. Instead, we have a ground lift switch here. That disconnects pin 1, and you don't really need it. I mostly run this with the switch on the ground off. It's just not necessary. And so it's there in case you need it, but this way it isolates the ground, because if it gets hot, you're going to hurt yourself or melt your interconnects. In other words, you become part of the circuit here. You go to ground, you touch it, and you're toast. And I've done it just internally. Carolyn has seen me fly across the room. It definitely wakes you up. Yeah, it's bad news. And the amp, and the other thing is our amplifiers have auto bias. Because I really don't like having to get a little screwdriver and adjusting the bias and looking at meters or LEDs or whatever. And tubes decay at different rates. So with an auto bias, you don't have to worry about thermal runaway, or it's called red plating, which is this picture here. That's the plates inside the tube get white hot. And if you leave it, it'll damage the amp and melt the tube. And talking of which, because the amps are designed around KT88s, okay? So, and it says in the manual, it says everywhere, do not use 6550s. Some of them try to use it. And I know of. And they looked back, and it looked like this. And they fortunately turned it off in time. It will melt the tubes. The KT88s are 42 watts each. And I'm only you do 60 watts, so you could do kind of the math. I mean, but if you put 6550s, KT90s, KT100s, it's bad. Basically, nothing good will happen. If you use KT120s, 150s, or the new 170s, I haven't tried those, but The 70s will be fine, I'm sure, but they're all fine because they're rated higher than the KT88s. So because it's a Class A, you're pulling enough current through it all the time with no signal going through it, that if you don't have the right tube in there, you're asking more of that tube than it's capable of doing. Any questions about that? One additional thing on tube rolling. These amplifiers beg to be tube rolled because they have all the tubes right there and you could change them and everything. It's, I mean, it's okay in one sense to do it, but on the other hand, if you do put the wrong tube in and it does damage the amplifier, it does void the warranty, but we'll be glad to fix it. I mean, well, there's a charge obviously for fixing it at that point, but so, and I could open the amp and I could tell whether it was the wrong tube or not. Not too many people have done it actually over the years, right, Carolyn? Just a few.
Only the smart ones. It's only the experts that do it. It's never like regular audiophiles that, are cautious. It's always the people who think they know everything are the ones that put in the wrong tubes, I swear.
My other biggest concern is, it's actually the signal tubes because it's a 9-pin socket and so much variety of tubes you can put in there. Oh, I wonder what this will do. And you put it fits, But on the output tubes too, just be aware. And then here's our monoblocks. And John, you're familiar with these, right? Stratton? There?
I am not, but I'm thinking about them, George.
Oh, you are. I thought you had them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this I have actually in 3 pairs. Okay. So I have 1, 2. There's 3 pairs in parallel. It's the way that this works. It's 150 watts a channel, and there's 2 12AU7s and 6 KT88s. This is the setup. Actually, the amp will run with 2 tubes. Not very loud, but because of they're in parallel, it's like the ultralinear Class A in parallel. So if you if one tube burns up, you only have to get a pair of tubes. You don't have to get a set of 6 that are matched. We get them matched. We get 2 sets of matched KT88s when we burn them in. Here's an interesting thing. You get KT88s, or any tube actually, and you burn it in for 50 hours. When you start them matched, at the end of 50 hours, they're not. Yeah, they drift in all sorts of directions. And then give it 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the month, they're all over the place. So I intentionally got my amps and I found 6 KT88s on one of them that were just completely different. I mean, totally different, and put it in just to see what would happen. They sounded fine. It's just they didn't quite have, when I put it on the bench and measured the output, they just didn't have the same power. But otherwise, and that's the thing about the auto bias. It compensates for these differences as they drift, because they're all going to drift. In fact, I still think I have the same set of KT88s in my monoblocks that I've had in there for like 3 years. And we use it a lot. I mean, we use it, home R&D, and we'll listen to music, and, the 12AU7s I've replaced about once a year. They seem to wear out. Let me show you the back end. I have 4 and 8 ohm tap on here, and also because I did a speak on connector for from a pro point of view. Actually, this is a much better speaker connector than binding post. I was a little frustrated with them. I use this occasionally when I use my own cables, but otherwise most cable manufacturers don't make that. But the binding posts work very well. Again, a single-ended, balanced input, true balanced input, and a ground lift.
George, could you speak please to your thoughts and Carolyn's thoughts about plugging either the Baya or the Eros directly into the wall versus through a power conditioner like a Niagara or something like that?
Yeah, thank you, John. I thank you for bringing that back up again. All right, let me talk. The thing I didn't talk about leading into that is the power supplies on these units. There are many different kinds of power. What you see here, these tubes are the amplification section. Okay, this is what amplifies. Back here, other than the output transformers, it's mostly power supply. There's two parts to an amplifier, as we call it. There's the power supply section and the amplification. And there are multiple ways to get the power supplies. The two most common are the a capacitive one, where you charge up a bunch of capacitors, and then you pull power from those capacitors into the amplifier as you need it. As the amplifier pulls at the bass kicks or whatever, the trumpet, it pulls power from the capacitors. And the other way is a choke-based power supply, which is which I use. And that is, it has very small capacitors, actually, relatively, but it pulls power out of the wall. The advantage of that is that you get a lot more power. That 500 volts at half an amp is real. I mean, that's a lot of power. And actually, on these units, it's 1 amp, 500 volts at 1 amp for each amp, for each unit monoblock. So you got 500 watts going in here, pulling power out of the wall. And because it's Class A, it pulls just about as much power with no music going through it as it is with full on, turn to 11. It's all there. And because of that, they sound better straight out of the wall, John. They tend to sound better out because it's more dynamic, and you just get more punch and a better sound. However, if you have power, and I have some clients like that whose mains voltage goes all over the place, and they get all these brownouts, and they get this, it's all. Then you have to go through some kind of conditioner. There's just no way around it. Because so the downside of having a choke-based power supply is that the high voltage rail depends on the mains voltage. So if your mains voltage goes down, the power rail goes down, and so on, up and down. Now, it's a small percentage, is almost imperceptible in power, and it just changes the power level more than anything. But and the advantage of having a capacitive one is you always have a constant capacitance, sort of. But on these, I prefer that they go into the wall. Now, at shows, we plug them right into the wall, no power conditioner. And that's in a hotel with like so many people pulling power out of the wall, and all the noise that goes into the mains in there. I mean, it's nutty, but they work very well that way. But I have some clients that have to use some kind of power conditioner because their mains are just everywhere. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, it sure does. Sorry, I was searching for the unmute button.
Yeah, I know. They make a little small thing in the corner, don't they? Yeah, like what the? So so that's the combination. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, somebody asked about estimation of tube life. I think you covered that in terms of saying your KT88s are 3 years old and they're still working, but you've done the 12 AUs once a year or so. Thoughts on the KT150 sonically?
They sound different.
Right.
The 120 sound different. The 150. I have a client that has a buyer. He's tried everything, and he's settled on KT120s, and I think Mallards on the 12 AU7s. I mean, it's just it's one of those things, as long as you don't stick a 6550 or a 90 or 100 in there, you're pretty safe. Tube life, they're tubes. You never know. I had clients that said, that we guarantee the tubes for 6 months, by the way. and the units for 2 years. But they've had tubes like for 3 or 4 months, and they said it was a spectacular flash inside the KD88. There was like a lightning storm. The tubes, sometimes they're good for a long time, and sometimes you just get one doesn't last as long. And that's why we didn't want to make equipment that uses expensive tubes. It just didn't make sense. But hey, they're there. Anything else, David?
Sam asked if a power amp with AB topology tube would last longer than an A topology tube.
Yes. Yeah, because you're not driving the tubes all the time.
Yeah.
On the other hand, when you think about it, it's kind of turning off a light bulb on and off. Does a light bulb last longer if you don't turn it on and off? Or does it, it's the same thing, it's like, similar thing, or does it last longer if you leave it on all the time? I actually, and don't leave these amps on all the time. I had one client that left them on 24/7 for 3 weeks and totally burnt out the tubes.
He had bad power though.
He had bad power.
He had terrible mains, that guy.
That did. But at the same time, answer the question, theoretically, I think an AB will last longer. Theoretically, give everything being similar.
All right.
Also, because the Class A, don't use these with high efficiency speakers. If you've got horns or something, 110 dB, efficiency, don't use these. They're not designed for that at all. You need like a 10 watt Class A or 5 watt Class A single-ended, amplifier, just some straightforward amplifier. That will sound so much better. These are not designed for that. And part of the reason is because they're Class A, they have a certain amount of background noise. Now, on a normal speaker that's 90 dBs or even 100 dBs, you don't hear it. I mean, it's just, it's like, I don't know, 4 millivolts of noise or something. It's very small. But if you've got a very efficient speaker, you do. And it just doesn't drive horns. It's just, these are designed to drive speakers. They love to drive them. Anything else?
But you're not talking something in the 92, 93, 94 dB sensitivity.
No,
right?
no. I have those. No, not at all. No, John. Horns. Think horns. Think something that, because people look, oh, Class A, I'm going to try this on my, 110, 120 dB efficient speakers. It's like, not a good match. Well, there's a couple of speakers that weren't a good match. Yeah, but that's certainly the number one. Yeah. One size doesn't fit all. It just doesn't work that way. It's the more refined you get stuff, the more it becomes. There's certain things that they just don't work with. Anything else?
No other
David?
questions on that.
Any
Any thoughts
questions?
on making a 300B amp from Zesto?
To make a what? 300?
Yeah, a single inlet amp. Are you considering producing?
I have thought about it, but not at the moment. Not at the moment. It is. I think actually the 300B amp, to be honest, will work very well in Europe because they're mad about horns. I mean, Germans especially. It's like it's great. It's a great. I understand. But no, not at the moment. Right now, we're focusing on getting this new Tesla reference, finished, completed, built, and we already have several people that are interested in buying the first run, actually. So we're just trying to focus on that. Anything else?
No.
Carolyn?
No, I think one thing I'd like you to, is the whole system. Were you going to talk about that, George?
Oh, yeah. So that's right. Thank you for reminding me. So the thing is, because each of these units, each piece that we've designed was actually designed to work with the next piece. So when you have a whole Zesto system, it has a certain amount of consistency in sound and really is designed to work together, and has you get the full benefit. And I think it's important because we use balanced, well, we use Jensen transformers throughout all the signal transformers. Excuse me. So, and then designed to work with each other. And so is the electronics. You know, all the way from the MC step up, all the way to you know, to the output of these monoblocks. When you have a whole system, it definitely makes a difference. They're designed to work with each other for sure, but they work great as individual pieces with other systems too. They designed to work with either way.
Okay.
George, one last question from me at any rate.
Yeah, please. I love questions, John.
For someone considering your amplifiers,
yeah,
can you speak to how you might counsel them to the Baya or the Eros, one or the other, in a particular situation?
Okay.
Is that too vague or?
No.
No, how big's your room, John?
Well, I didn't want to make this about me for the
group, but it's a good example.
But you know, it's roughly 17 feet square with an add-on. It's open to one end and stuff like that. You know, so it's not that huge a room, but you know, for someone that has an average size, it's a bedroom upstairs. It's been converted to a listening room, right?
Okay, no. I mean, it's a good example because I'm not meaning to put you on the spot.
No.
And then, what kind of speakers do you have?
Well. Sorry, everyone on the call. I wasn't trying to personalize this too much, but I mean, they happen to be Lawrence Audio cellos that are like 92, 93 dB.
Yeah, so they'll work either way. It's just the standard things when people ask me. This is okay. So either one would work. The monoblocks tend to control the speakers better.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Right. So back to the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail. The monoblocks sound substantially better than the stereo, especially when you're going to a higher volume. It depends on the music you hear, what volume level you hear. You know, I mean, I listen to, our room is 14
by 20.
14 by 20 with the Django L's. And a couple of sections in my open, actually, two walls are very open. So effectively, the volume of air that it has to move is quite a lot. And the monoblocks really do work. And sometimes Carolyn and I just rock out, you know, having a 95 dB SPL and got, you know, some rock and roll on it, just, you know, have fun. And then, or it's classical, then you have, so it's just, it's not a straightforward answer. I think that in general, the monoblocks sound better than the stereo unit, but there's certain, but it's kind of like, depends on your use and the kind of music you listen to, and there's a lot, you know, all those kind of variables, you know. And if you don't listen to music very loud and you're doing mostly classical, and you've got speakers that are not, I'm speaking to everybody, not just you, John. You got speakers that are like, you know, that they're not very forward, and you it's more polite presentation. I think the Baya is probably better, but I know lots of people that use the Baya and do just.
No, I think the Baya kicks butt. I'm sorry. I'm arguing with you because it's really the size of the room, and in your room, I mean, if you have a choice, it's usually budget determines it almost more than that, because these sound great in a little hotel room too, and so does the Baya. So it's really more about budget, but a monoblock will always sound better than a stereo. It just does.
Yeah, because you have, you know, better stereo imaging. You got, I mean, it just everything is, you know, a better performance. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, we've used the buyer in many shows that we've done, and it sounds very good. And we've used Monoblocks, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a straightforward answer, John. Sorry, it's but we could talk privately at some point if you want to just get, you know, and we can go over your specifics. But yeah. Any
All
other
right.
questions? Yeah.
George, Larry Tam from Hayward wanted to know if you think, as an engineer, that solid state amps, particularly the Class D amps, will ever be able to duplicate the tonal quality of high fidelity tube amps.
Well, I have no way of, I don't have a crystal ball, so I have no idea, you know, really.
Yeah.
I can only tell you right now that a tube amp sounds like a tube amp, and a solid state sounds like a solid state, and the Class D sounds like a Class D. It's not like one size fits all. It's not like one's better than the other necessarily. You know, it depends on what you like and what kind of music you listen to and your circumstances, you know, and the application. It's not like one. I don't think one's better than the other necessarily. I'd prefer personally tubes, obviously, because that's what I'm. Let me get rid of this. I prefer tubes, obviously, personally. That's what we're using. That's what we designed, and they have a quality that prefer. But who knows? You know, I don't know.
Okay. And then AJ from New York City wanted to know if you're planning a phono stage between the Andros Deluxe II and the Tessera, because he'll always only ever have one turntable tone arm, but he wants the same things with a separate power supply and a dual mono design that the Tessera has. So
I don't know whether we'll never ever make it. Right now, we don't have that planned. But what I would recommend to him is to listen to the Deluxe and decide whether he needs to have it quiet or not.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty darn quiet. So I totally get the advantage of having a separate power supply. Obviously, we make one that way. But I really think that if he listened to the Deluxe, it may be quiet enough for him that would not be an issue.
Great.
Anything else?
No. Yes. Here's a general question from Sam to everyone. Is it possible to get an preamp out of an integrated tube amp? Is it possible to GE? Sam, do you want to ask your question? Because you left off some letters when you typed it.
Yes. Can you hear me, George? Hi.
Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I have this is a general question. I really appreciate it if you could answer. I have an integrated tube amp.
Yep.
And I would like to get a pre-out out of it so I could use it for my subs.
Yep.
Is it possible to do that?
It depends on the unit and if there's somebody that could re-engineer that.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Yes.
Made tube amp, and it sounded pretty good, but it only has. I need the pre-out for the subs.
Yeah.
That way I don't have to. Yeah.
The thing about subs is, from my experience, I prefer to hook them up. I know that what you're trying to. I prefer to hook them up to the speakers because then they go up and down volume more evenly with the speakers. But I totally get it. That you want another output so you could get it out of the pre. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the circuits and whether it's possible or not in that particular one. You could ask a technician somewhere that may be able to take a look at it. You know, I mean, that's unfortunately I'm not familiar enough with that to tell you yes or no.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I think that's it.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh,
Hi, Carolyn.
No, it's Janet. Janet has a
Janet.
question.
No, I'm almost embarrassed to ask this question, but the sight of those beautiful tubes in the air, you know, where you can see them, prompts my question. I have an Audiomat tube amp, and it's closed like a typical solid state receiver. I cannot see when the tubes are going. Is there any way I can tell when my tubes are going without removing the cover?
The tubes don't, okay, my experience, Janet, is either the tubes go in a very spectacular way that you can't miss it.
Ah.
The classic one was at the Newport show. We went into that, this, was it 645s, the really big tubes? You ever see those things? Yeah, we were looking at these amps. We turned around, and all of a sudden it was like the sun came out, like the flash bulb, and we could see our shadows on the wall. The KD88s don't go that bad, but they do. Either it's really spectacular, but most of the time they just fade away.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That do they actually just slowly degrade so you get
Yep.
poorer and poorer sound? That's
Yep.
what I think, and I just don't have any way of checking, and it frustrates me.
Yeah, your
Well,
ears.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
How old
Can
how old are the tubes?
Well, they must be going on 3 years now.
I would say the chances are they need to be replaced.
That's what I'm thinking. Yep. Just do it. I guess I put it on a schedule and just do it every so many years, I suppose.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what I would do. Yeah, that's and probably when you put the tubes back, the new tubes in, Janet, you're gonna go, whoa.
Whoa, what have I been
Sounds-
missing? Why didn't I do this sooner?
Yeah, that's kind of the other telltale sign I have on our equipment is that the center image shifts. Your vocal is no longer in the middle; it starts drifting to one side or the other side because the
That's
tubes
interesting.
decay. Yeah, the tubes decay at different rates. So all of a sudden, like over here, it's over there. Yeah, that's a sign that they're wearing.
Okay,
Good question.
thank you. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're welcome. Any other questions, general questions or?
Going once, going twice.
Hi, John. Thanks.
Well, we're always available for questions. So if anyone wants to just contact us directly, we're always available.
And you can come to Expona this year and see you in one of the
Yeah.
rooms. And that's what
Yeah.
I miss most
Yeah.
about the shows is being able to talk to people like you there because you're always so open and willing to talk and answer questions. And so we'll return to those days sometime.
If I may ask, George,
Yes, Sam.
about the audio, the Rocky Audio Feast that's going to be happening in October. Are you guys going?
No,
No.
no. We can only do one Midwest show. They're like barely a month apart. And it's pretty much a similar audience. And so we're only going to do one of them, and we picked Expona.
Or,
To do.
well, when is that?
It's like Halloween weekend
Oh, okay.
October,
Okay.
Yeah.
In Chicago.
in Chicago.
Chicago.
Yeah, it's
It's
gonna be
really a
cold.
good show.
It's a good show. It is.
It is much bigger, I say, than Rocky Mountain. I mean, as far as the number of vendors and, they have incredible live entertainment and they have, it's really, really a well done show. They know how to put on a show very well. And it's, you pretty much see everything.
Oh.
Anything else?
Hi, this is Larry Brown. I just
Larry.
had one comment because I saw you at Expona the last time you were there. And I've seen you
Oh,
since
yeah, great.
2019. And I've been to Rocky Mountain. Even though I was a VIP person, I, as a consumer, because I go to the shows not only to see, but actually I'm interested in things. And then 2009, I was interested in particular things,
Mhm.
like not product types. Like I was looking for a DA, and I was looking for stuff. I looked at your stuff. I, as just a consumer, I didn't have that great a time at Expona. it seems that Exponent is mostly for, I got the impression that people were interested in distributors, retail dealers and the press. And I kind of got, I wouldn't say completely blown away, ignored, but it was very clear. Like I tried to look at turntables at Clear Audio. I never could get their attention. They were always busy working on other things. I find Rocky Mountain more relaxed and certainly better for me as a consumer looking for stuff to actually, am I interested in this stuff enough to investigate further for a possible purchase? Am I, I'm interested in that and I can't hear it anywhere. This is the first place I can hear it. So just for me as a consumer, Rocky Mountain is more, is a more welcoming and just, I don't know, works better for me.
It's a good show, Larry.
It's a good show.
We can't, and we love Marjorie, who runs it, and we've always done Rocky Mountain, but this year we just can't do both.
No, I got it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with any successful show. When you get huge crowds, it is often difficult to be able to talk to the people in the rooms, no matter how friendly those people are, but you're competing against greater numbers of crowds who go in. So going to the small shows like San Francisco, the people would, it was so small, it was considered a regional.
I love
show.
that show.
And
It was a
people
very
say
nice
that
show.
because you always got to talk to everybody, because there was 1/10 the number of turnout of people there.
Right.
I love going to a show like Exponent or the big LA shows where you actually stay in the hotel and you wake up and you're there, you go to sleep and you're there, and there's a huge crowd. It's like, some people don't like New York City. I love the buzz. I love to visit. I don't want to live there, but I love being amidst 8 million people in a city. And the same thing in an audio show. It can be crazy, but it's an experience.
Well, I always stay at the show hotels, and Rocky Mountain is not that small of a show. I mean, there's a lot of people there that go, and I've been in really, really packed rooms, and Rocky Mountain is not a small show. It's
Did you
just
go
that
last time to the new location?
I didn't. I'm interested.
Yeah, it's a very different experience.
That's what I understand. The last experience, it was difficult getting food because the hotel they used was not a very good hotel.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they moved. The food situation isn't that great at Exponent either because I'm coming from out of town and I don't have a car. And that hotel, trying to get dinners in that hotel that they use is not that great. Most of the people I saw were hooking up with people and going into town. But, I don't know.
Well, not shows are for everyone.
That's
It's
right.
I totally get it. I like both the big shows and the smaller shows. We try to do all of them as many as we can. But for us, not doing shows last year. Actually, the only show we did last year was Tampa in Florida.
In 2020, yep.
2020. That was the only show we did, and actually, we missed everybody. We missed everyone coming in and talking to people and our fellow, manufacturers. We missed a lot of people, but at the end of the day, last year, it didn't hurt us last year not doing any shows, other than that one. So, we had to start, and I think most manufacturers will start looking at what is the benefit of each particular show and how many shows can you do. And make it worthwhile, because it costs a huge amount of money for us to do a show. So this is part of the thing. Next year, it's next year. We'll see what happens. But we'll probably do 2 or 3 shows a year, and that's for us. And we just have to decide which ones. Yeah.
George, back to the amp.
Yes, Sam.
How do you test your amplifier once they're designed and up to spec, and do you have a specific way of testing them?
You mean a final test before Q&A before it leaves?
What, when you approve that this design is done and it's ready to go?
Oh, from an R&D point of view. Okay, well, first of all, the first step is if I make a change, does it make it sound better or does it make it sound worse? If it makes it sound worse, I know I've done with my R&D. Okay, so that's the first step from an engineering point of view. Then I know I've got it there. Then I can measure all the specs, frequency response, harmonic distortion, maximum output, all heat. I do a whole range of tests. I actually have a checklist I go through to make sure I don't miss anything. And that's the bench test. Okay, and then I listen to it. The final thing I do is just stick them in my system and take a listen.
You do that for each amp?
Each amp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, when it leaves here, I know it's working 100%. Not just spec. I mean, I listen to it. It works 100%. There's nothing sneaky that gets through in there. Something's out of phase or something, No, and I really haven't had any issues, but then at the same time, I just, that's what I do.
So every amp tastes exactly the same if they're the same model and all that?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
They're very consistent.
And they're all burnt in for at least 50 hours minimum. And then they're tested and listened to.
Okay.
So when a customer gets it, it's already, you need to continue to burn it in. But we spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Well, George and Carolyn, you've given us more than a couple of hours of your time, so I want to thank you for that. I know you were worried that we wouldn't be able to fill the hour and a half, and you've stuck it with us through all of the questions, and it's great to see you in my office on Zoom.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Oh,
Yeah. Thank you.
it was wonderful. I'm sorry I'm not going to Expana this year. The hotel sold out right away, and I had to adjust some other things, but we're looking forward to seeing you at a show somewhere in the future.
All right.
Yeah, be great to see all you guys
Yeah.
and ladies.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.